Hey guys, welcome to RedSunStories. Hope you're doing well. Tonight, you'll discover why the elders of Kyoto lock their doors on certain nights and whisper desperate prayers until sunrise. Because when the boundary between worlds breaks, being seen by what marches through the darkness means a fate worse than death. So, before you get comfortable, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe if you enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments what time it is for you. I would love to connect with you guys. Now let's dive into tonight's story together. The drums were already too close when Takeshi realized his mistake. He pressed his back against the shrine's wooden wall, breath shallow, fingers digging into the weathered timber behind him. The city should never have been this quiet. Kyoto's streets, even at the darkest hour, hummed with life. Night watchmen calling the hour, late drinking merchants stumbling home, the distant bark of dogs. But tonight, on this night of the monkey when every household had barred their doors and shuttered their windows, the silence pressed down like a physical weight. And beneath that silence, growing louder with each heartbeat, the drums. Not the ceremonial taiko of festivals, not the measured rhythm of temple monks. This sound came from somewhere older, somewhere wrong. A deep, resonant pulse that seemed to echo from the stones themselves, from the very bones of the earth. Takeshi's hands trembled as he fumbled for the paper talisman the old woman had pressed into his palm 3 hours ago when the sun still hung above the western mountains. "Stay inside," she had whispered, her ancient fingers clutching his sleeve with surprising strength. When darkness falls on the night of the monkey, the boundary breaks. The parade walks, and any soul foolish enough to witness it. She'd trailed off, but her expression finished the warning more clearly than words ever could. He dismissed her. Of course he had. Takeshi was a rational man, a merchant of fine silks who'd traveled to the capital from Osaka with modern sensibilities. These rural superstitions, these old women's tales, they belonged to a dying age. He had business to conclude, papers to retrieve from his warehouse near Gion before his departure at dawn. A simple task. 1 hour, perhaps 2. The warehouse stood 3 streets away. It might as well have been in China. The temperature had dropped as he'd stepped outside. Not the gradual cooling of evening, but a sudden, unnatural chill that raised every hair on his arms. The lanterns lining the street, those that hadn't been extinguished, flickered and dimmed, their flames shrinking to blue-tinged points. And then the silence had fallen, heavy and absolute, like a blanket thrown over the world. Takeshi had run, not in panic, not yet, but with the sudden, animal understanding that he needed shelter, needed walls between himself and whatever was coming. The shrine had been closest, its red torii gate looming from the mist that had begun, impossibly, to rise from the dry street stones. Now crouched in its shadow, he understood the old woman's terror. The drums grew louder. But it wasn't just drums anymore. Flutes joined the rhythm, playing melodies that twisted wrong, notes that climbed too high and fell too low, music that made his teeth ache and his vision blur. And beneath it all, rising like a tide, voices, hundreds of voices, thousands, chanting, singing, laughing in a language he almost recognized, words that tugged at the deepest, most forgotten parts of his mind. The parade had begun. Takeshi's fingers finally closed around the talisman, a strip of paper covered in characters he couldn't read, inked in what looked like blood. The old woman's final gift, his final protection. He pressed it against his chest and tried to remember the spell she'd taught him, the ancient words that might shield him from being seen. Kata shihaya. How did it continue? Ekase ni. The chanting grew louder, drowning his thoughts. closer now, so close he could hear individual voices within the chorus, some deep as temple bells, others high and chittering like insects, others that gurgled and hissed. Through the shrine's entrance, in the space between the torii posts, Takeshi saw the first lantern. It floated above the street, casting a sickly green light that illuminated nothing and everything. Behind it, shadows moved. Not human shadows. Too tall, too many limbs. Moving with a rhythm that matched the drums, swaying and writhing in a dance that predated human memory. He wanted to close his eyes. Every instinct screamed at him to look away, to press his face against the shrine wall and pray for dawn. But he couldn't. His eyes remained fixed on that approaching light, on the shapes that followed it, drawn by a terrible fascination that felt like hooks in his mind, pulling him forward, even as his body remained frozen. The old woman had been right. On certain nights marked by ancient calendars that counted in animals and elements, the barrier between worlds grew thin, and on those nights, they marched. The forgotten things, the discarded things, the supernatural beings that humans had stopped believing in, but which had never stopped existing. They gathered from mountains and rivers, from abandoned temples and forgotten crossroads, from the spaces between heartbeats and the shadows behind mirrors. They gathered and they walked. The Hyakki Yagyo, the night parade of 100 demons, though 100 was merely a number, a way of saying countless, innumerable, infinite. Takeshi understood that now, watching the second lantern appear, then a third, then a dozen, then too many to count, each casting that wrong-colored light over shapes that made his mind rebel, made him want to scream or laugh, or simply stop thinking entirely. The drums thundered now, shaking the shrine's foundation. The flutes shrieked. The voices rose in a crescendo that seemed to split the very sky. And at the front of the procession, leading the parade, walked something that wore the shape of an old man, but moved like smoke, like water, like nothing human at all. Takeshi's lips moved, forming the protective spell, but no sound emerged. His voice had fled, taking with it his final defense against the night. The parade was here. Later, much later, if he survived to see dawn, Takeshi would wonder at what precise moment he'd sealed his fate. Was it his arrogance, dismissing the old woman's warning with a patronizing smile? Was it 3 weeks ago, when he'd carelessly tossed the small shrine offering stone he'd found, not knowing it housed a kami's favor? Or was it written from birth, his name inscribed in some supernatural ledger that marked him for this encounter? The questions would haunt him, but in that moment, pressed against the shrine wall with his heart hammering against his ribs, only one thought filled his mind. How did I not know? He'd lived in Kyoto for 2 months. 2 months of conducting business, walking these very streets, passing thousands of citizens going about their daily lives. How had no one mentioned this? How had the city's rhythms not shifted to accommodate such a fundamental truth? But of course they had. He simply hadn't noticed. The way shops closed early on certain nights, the manner in which his business partners had hurried him along as sunset approached, declining his invitations for evening tea. The absence of vendors near Jion's temples after dark. The old woman herself appearing as if summoned, pressing the talisman into his hands with those urgent, terrified eyes. The warnings had been everywhere. He'd simply refused to see them, armored in his modern skepticism. Memory flooded back, his grandfather's stories, told during childhood summers in the countryside, tales dismissed as entertainment, colorful fictions designed to keep children obedient, stories of the parade, of supernatural processions that claimed any who witnessed them. His grandfather had described them with a storyteller's flair. Demons with horns and fangs, ghosts trailing torn silk, possessed household objects dancing on invisible strings. Takeshi had laughed at those stories. They'd seemed so quaint, so primitive. The first creature passed the torii gate. It walked on legs that bent backward, each step producing a soft clicking sound like bamboo striking stone. Its body, illuminated by that green lantern light, resembled a heron's, long, thin, covered in midnight blue feathers. But its face was almost human, stretched and twisted, with a beak where a mouth should be and eyes that glowed with inner fire. Those eyes swept across the shrine grounds, and for one eternal second, Takeshi felt their gaze brush past him. He stopped breathing. The creature's head tilted, considering. Then it moved on, following the drums deeper into the parade. Takeshi's lungs burned. He gasped, pressing his hand over his mouth to muffle the sound. The talisman crackled against his chest. Was it protecting him, or would its power fade? How long could paper and ink hold against this? More shapes followed the heron thing, a procession of impossibilities, each more bizarre than the last. Some walked upright, almost human in posture. Others crawled or slithered or floated, defying natural law. A creature made entirely of twisted roots and mushrooms shambled past, leaving spores in its wake that glowed briefly before fading. Behind it came something that resembled a paper umbrella, but with a single leg and an eye that blinked wetly in the center of its canopy. A karakasa obake, he remembered. Household objects transformed by age and neglect into something other. The drums pounded in rhythm with his heartbeat now. Or perhaps his heart had synchronized to the drums. He couldn't tell anymore. The boundary between self and parade blurred, as if the mere act of witnessing was drawing him in, making him part of the procession. Kata shihaya ekase niku rini. The spell's words surfaced through his panic. He mouthed them silently, desperately. Ta metsu rubeshi. But the complete incantation eluded him, fragments scattered by fear. A skeleton walked past, but not human, its bones too long, its skull crowned with curved horns that gleamed like polished jade. It wore the tattered remains of samurai armor, pieces of metal plate hanging from its frame by rotted silk cords. In one skeletal hand it carried a rusted sword, in the other a severed head that still blinked and moved its mouth, trying to speak words that emerged as bubbles of dark liquid. Behind the skeleton warrior came a procession of ghosts, Yurai in white burial kimonos, their faces obscured by long black hair that writhed like living things. Their feet didn't touch the ground. They floated 6 inches above the stones, moving in absolute silence despite the chaos around them, their hands reaching forward with fingers that extended far too long, joints bending in ways that defied anatomy. Takeshi recognized one of them. The knowledge hit him like a physical blow. Masako, his business partner's daughter, who'd vanished 3 months ago, her disappearance explained as an elopement with a traveling merchant. But here she was, or what remained of her, drifting in the parade with that same serene expression she'd worn in life, now frozen in death, her eyes distant and empty. She turned her head as she passed. For one horrible moment, those empty eyes found his hiding place. Recognition flickered across her features. Takeshi-san. And her mouth opened in a silent scream that went on and on, her jaw unhinging further than physics should allow. Then she was past, carried along by the parade's momentum, and Takeshi couldn't tell if she'd truly seen him or if he'd imagined that moment of connection. The parade seemed endless. For every creature that passed, 10 more appeared behind it. The drums never faltered. The flutes never paused for breath. The chanting grew louder and more frenzied. Time itself felt warped, stretched thin like silk over a frame. Had minutes passed? Or hours? The moon hadn't moved. Or had it? The mist thickened, obscuring everything beyond the immediate procession, turning the world into this small bubble of shrine grounds and supernatural chaos. A massive oni lumbered into view, easily 12 feet tall, its skin the color of arterial blood. Iron-studded clubs hung from its belt, each larger than a man. Horns spiraled from its forehead and its mouth, filled with fangs like daggers, split into a grin that held nothing human, nothing kind. It carried a sake jug the size of a wine barrel, drinking deep with each step, crimson liquid spilling down its chin to mix with the blood already caked on its chest. Behind the oni came Kappa, water demons with bowl-shaped depressions in their heads, still filled with the river water that gave them power. Their beaked mouths snapped at each other playfully, webbed hands gesturing in what might have been conversation if the sounds they made weren't so utterly alien. Then came the Tsukumogami, the parade's strangest members. Household objects transformed by a century of service and subsequent abandonment into yokai. A tea kettle with eyes walked on tiny feet formed from its base, steam pouring from its spout in shapes that almost formed faces. A shamisen plucked its own strings with fingers grown from its frame, producing notes that wove through the parade's music like threads of silver madness. Scrolls unrolled themselves and rolled forward like wheels, the calligraphy on their surfaces writhing and reforming into warnings Takeshi couldn't read. A mirror floated past, its surface reflecting not the shrine, but some other place. A courtyard lit by paper lanterns, where figures danced in silk robes of ancient cut, their laughter echoing from within the glass. Takeshi's mind reeled. This wasn't a parade. It was a celebration, a festival of the supernatural, a night when everything abandoned, forgotten, and denied by the rational world took form and claimed the streets as their own. Joy radiated from the marchers, terrible and pure. They sang because they could. They danced because for one night the world remembered them, and woe to any human who stood in their way. The shrine offered no true protection. Takeshi understood that now, watching the parade flow past like a river of impossible things. Sacred ground might slow some yokai, might discourage casual approach, but the Hyakki Yagyo was no casual gathering. This was power that predated shrine construction, predated human settlement in these islands. These beings had walked when the land was young, when humans were scarce, and gods were many. The talisman against his chest grew warm. He could feel its energy struggling, a dam against a flood that grew stronger with each passing moment. How much longer before it failed? Minutes? Seconds? He thought of the old woman again. What had she said? The boundary breaks. He'd interpreted it as the boundary between worlds, between the realm of spirits and the realm of flesh. But perhaps it meant something more immediate. The boundary of human safety. The boundary of rational understanding. The boundary that kept the supernatural at a respectful distance during daylight hours. All boundaries were collapsing tonight. The parade's music shifted. The drums, which had maintained a steady march rhythm, began to accelerate. The flutes climbed to registers that made his ears ring, notes that seemed to drill directly into his skull. And the voices, the countless voices chanting in that ancient tongue, rose to a fever pitch, syllables overlapping into a wall of sound that vibrated in his chest cavity. Something was coming. Takeshi felt it before he saw it. A presence that dwarfed everything that had passed before. Something so fundamentally powerful that the air itself grew heavy with its approach. The lesser yokai pressed to the edges of the street, making way, their revelry dimming to respectful murmurs. Through the mist, carried on a palanquin of twisted blackthorn wood, came the parade's true leader. He appeared as an old man, wizened, bald, with a head elongated upward in a shape that suggested nobility or perhaps simply impossible age. He wore robes that might have been white centuries ago, but had yellowed with time, embroidered with patterns that hurt to look at directly, geometric shapes that folded in on themselves in ways that suggested dimensions beyond the three Takeshi's mind could process. Narration, the supreme commander of yokai. Takeshi knew the name without knowing how he knew it. Perhaps the knowledge came from his grandfather's stories, surfacing from memory's depths. Or perhaps proximity to such power simply burned the truth directly into his awareness. This was the creature who moved through human homes uninvited, drinking tea and acting as master of the house, while the residents remained strangely unconcerned, their minds clouded by his presence. This was the being who commanded the parade, who called the forgotten and discarded to march each year through the streets of the capital. The palanquin floated rather than being carried, supported by tendrils of darkness that writhed beneath it, like living smoke. As it passed the shrine's torii, Nurarion's eyes, dark as void, old as mountains, swept across the grounds. They found Takeshi immediately. The world stopped, not metaphorically. The drums ceased mid-beat. The flutes held their notes in sustained, impossible silence. The marchers froze mid-step, mid-dance, mid-revelation. Even the mist hung motionless, droplets suspended in air like jewels. Only three things still moved: Takeshi's hammering heart, his terrified breathing, and Nurarion's ancient knowing smile. The Supreme Commander raised one elongated finger, beckoning. Come. The command didn't emerge as sound, but as a compulsion, a hook that sank into Takeshi's chest and pulled. His legs moved against his will, carrying him forward from the shrine's shadow into the street's full view. The talisman against his chest burst into flames, not hot, but cold, ice cold, consuming the paper in blue fire that left no ash. His final protection burned away. Takeshi stood exposed before the parade, before thousands of eyes, human and inhuman, living and dead, merciful and cruel. They all watched him now, this single mortal who'd been foolish enough, arrogant enough, unlucky enough to witness what should remain hidden. Nurarion spoke, and this time sound accompanied the words. His voice was many voices layered over each other, young and old, male and female, human and utterly alien. Why do you tremble, merchant of silks? The question carried genuine curiosity, as if the concept of fear puzzled him. You stand before a celebration, a festival of those who endure beyond memory. Should this not bring joy? Takeshi's mouth opened, but no words emerged. His tongue felt thick, unresponsive. Terror had stolen his voice more completely than any magic. Nurarion tilted his head, considering. Ah, you fear death. Your kind always fears the ending, never understanding that endings are merely transitions. He gestured to the assembled parade. Look upon us. We are proof that nothing truly dies. Forgotten, yes. Discarded, certainly. But we endure. We remember. And on nights such as this, we reclaim what was always ours. The parade murmured agreement, a sound like wind through 10,000 leaves. You have witnessed the Hyakki Yagyo, Nurarion continued. His smile never wavered, and somehow that made it more terrible. This cheerful discussion of Takeshi's fate, delivered with the warmth of a grandfather addressing a confused child. The laws are old, merchant. Older than your bloodline, older than this city. Those who see the parade must join it or be consumed by it. There are no other paths. Join it. Takeshi's mind seized on those words. Join it. Become like them. Like the ghost of Masako. Like the twisted creatures dancing and singing. Like something other that wore his shape but held no humanity inside. Or be consumed. Devoured by the parade, his essence scattered across 10,000 mouths, digested and forgotten. Neither option offered survival. Not the survival he understood, not the sunrise he'd planned to see, not the return to Osaka, not the rational world of trade and silk and human concerns. However, Nurarihan raised that finger again, and the gesture commanded absolute attention. The laws also speak of mercy, of those who witness through no arrogance, but through fate's design, through divine appointment. Hope flickered in Takeshi's chest, dangerous and desperate. "You carry no malice," the Supreme Commander said, leaning forward to study him more closely. "No disrespect in your heart, only ignorance. And ignorance, while punishable, is also forgivable, under certain conditions." The parade waited. Takeshi's heart waited. The entire night seemed to hold its breath. "Survive until dawn," Nurarihan said simply. "Walk with us, merchant. Keep pace with the parade. Do not fall. Do not flee. Do not close your eyes or cover your ears. Bear witness to every moment, every sight, every sound. If you can endure until the first rays touch Mount Hiei's peak, if you can maintain your sanity and your soul through the hours of darkness, then you will be released. Changed, yes, forever marked, but alive." He smiled wider, and there was no kindness in it now, only ancient, terrible amusement. Most cannot. Most crack within the first mile. Their minds shatter like fine pottery dropped on stone. But perhaps you, merchant of silks who dared the streets on the night of the monkey, perhaps you possess strength unknown even to yourself. The palanquin rose higher, and Nurarihan gestured to the assembled horde. "Find your place in the parade, Takeshi of Osaka. March with the forgotten, dance with the damned, and pray that your mind proves stronger than your fear." The drums thundered back to life, the flutes shrieked, the voices resumed their ancient chant, and the parade, which had paused to judge him, resumed its march through Kyoto's sleeping streets. Takeshi stood frozen for one heartbeat longer. Then, with no other choice available, he began to walk. The parade swallowed him whole. One moment Takeshi walked alone in the street, a single figure of flesh among the supernatural masses. The next, he was surrounded, absorbed into the procession as naturally as water accepting a dropped stone. Creatures pressed close on all sides, some corporeal enough to brush against him with fur or scales or substance he couldn't identify, others merely present, their essence tangible, but their forms made of shadow and suggestion. He tried to focus on putting one foot before the other. Walk, don't fall, don't flee. The simple commands became a mantra in his mind, blocking out everything else. The drums provided rhythm, their beat synchronizing with his footsteps until he couldn't tell if he followed them or they followed him. To his right walked a creature that seemed formed from braided rope and tattered cloth, standing 8 feet tall on legs like woven hemp. Its face, if it could be called a face, consisted of 2 dark holes where eyes should be, and a gash of a mouth that moved constantly, whispering in a language of rustles and creaks. Takeshi dared not look at it directly, but he felt its attention, its curiosity, about this human who'd been granted the dubious mercy of walking rather than joining permanently. To his left, a procession of skulls floated at shoulder height, arranged in a vertical column. Each skull belonged to a different species. Human, certainly, but also bear and boar and creatures Takeshi couldn't name. They chattered their teeth in rhythm with the drums, creating a percussive counterpoint that felt like it drilled directly into his spine. He focused forward, on the backs of the marchers ahead, a dancing skeleton clothed in the remnants of an emperor's robes, a massive serpent that walked upright on a coil of its own body, hood flared, eyes like burnished copper catching the lantern light. Behind them, more shapes, an endless river of the supernatural flowing through Kyoto's arteries. The city itself had transformed. The streets Takeshi knew, familiar avenues lined with shops and homes, now revealed themselves as something older. Ancient markers appeared on walls, characters in scripts he didn't recognize but which his mind translated into warnings. Turn back. Sacred ground. The dead walk here. How had he never noticed them before? Or had they always been invisible, only revealing themselves in this hour between midnight and dawn when the worlds overlapped? Temples he'd passed 100 times now showed their true age. Not centuries old, but millennia, their foundations predating human worship, built on sites where something else had been honored first. The stones themselves seemed aware, watching the parade with recognition. Old friends, they seemed to whisper. Welcome home. The parade moved through Gion, past shuttered tea houses where geisha and their patrons slept, oblivious or willfully ignorant of the procession outside. How many knew? How many lay awake, pressed against walls, listening to the drums and praying for dawn? The wealthy merchant houses stood silent, their gates barred, paper talismans pasted over every entrance, marks that glowed faintly with spiritual energy, wards maintained by onmyoji practitioners who understood the old laws. Those protections held. The parade flowed around them like water around stones, never testing the barriers, respecting the compact. We walk where we will, the parade seemed to say, but we honor those who honor us. A child appeared in the procession ahead, or what had once been a child. Its features were soft, cherubic, but its eyes held centuries. It wore a bib stained with what might have been blood, or might have been red pigment. Impossible to tell in the green lantern light. It turned back to look at Takeshi, smiled with far too many teeth, and offered him something. A small doll made of straw and paper, crude and ancient. Takeshi's hand moved to accept it before his mind caught up. He jerked back, recognizing the danger. Accepting gifts from yokai bound you to them, created obligations that could never be fully repaid. The child thing giggled, a sound like breaking glass, and tucked the doll back into its robes before skipping forward to rejoin the march. Don't accept anything, Takeshi added to his mental list of survival rules. Don't touch, don't speak unless spoken to, don't acknowledge invitations. But oh, the invitations came. A beautiful woman materialized beside him, keeping perfect pace. She wore 12 layers of kimono in the ancient style, each layer a different shade that flowed from midnight blue at her feet to pure white at her throat. Her face paint was flawless, white as bone, lips a perfect bow of crimson. She smiled at him, eyes warm with what could have been genuine interest or perfect mimicry of human emotion. Tired merchant? Her voice was honey and silk. You could rest, ride in my palanquin, watch the parade rather than walking. Wouldn't that be better? Easier? Every instinct screamed at him to accept. His legs already ached, and they'd barely begun. Hours remained until dawn. How many? He couldn't guess. but the sky showed no hint of lightning. To sit, to rest, to observe rather than participate. No. His voice emerged as a croak, but he forced the word out. Thank you, no. The woman's smile didn't falter. Pity. The offer stands, should you change your mind. She drifted away, dissolving into the mist, and Takeshi knew with certainty that accepting would have meant remaining in that palanquin forever, one more decoration in her eternal entourage. The parade turned down a narrow street Takeshi didn't recognize, though he'd walked every avenue in this district. The buildings pressed close, their upper stories leaning toward each other until they nearly touched, creating a tunnel of wood and paper through which the procession flowed. Lanterns hung from every window, not the modern oil lamps, but ancient paper constructions painted with characters that glowed with inner light. Faces appeared in those windows, dead faces, living faces, faces that were both and neither. They watched the parade with expressions ranging from fear to reverence to hungry anticipation. Some threw offerings, bundles of incense, cups of sake, paper folded into intricate shapes. The marchers caught these gifts, integrating them into the celebration, and the drumbeat intensified with each offering received. A massive torii gate materialized ahead, standing in the middle of the street where no gate should be. It was ancient beyond measure, the wood blackened with age, covered in moss and lichen that glowed with bioluminescence. Characters carved into its surface burned with blue fire, and Takeshi couldn't look at them directly without his eyes watering. The parade passed beneath it, and Takeshi felt the threshold's power wash over him, a sensation like plunging into cold water, then emerging changed. His human warmth seemed to leach away, replaced by something else. Not cold exactly, but neutral. A state between life and death where supernatural and mortal could coexist without one consuming the other. The threshold marks passage. His grandfather's voice echoed from memory. Gates are dangerous. They separate here from there, now from then, is from isn't. Pass through a spirit gate during the parade, and you'll never be fully human again. Too late now. Takeshi stumbled forward, his legs moving automatically, and realized he could no longer feel the street beneath his feet. Not numb, he simply existed slightly above the physical plane, walking on the boundary itself. A kitsune paced beside him now, a fox the size of a wolf, its fur the color of fresh blood, its 9 tails flowing behind it like banners of silk. Each tail moved independently, writing characters in the air that briefly glowed before fading. The fox's eyes met his, and intelligence radiated from that gaze. Not animal intelligence, but something vaster, older, weighted with centuries of accumulated cunning. First time? The kitsune asked, its voice somehow female and male simultaneously, young and ancient, amused and serious. Takeshi nodded, not trusting his voice. You're doing well, the fox said conversationally, as if they walked through a market rather than a supernatural procession. Most humans collapse by now, faint from fear or run screaming. But you walk, you endure, curious. I have no choice. The words came with difficulty, his tongue thick. Everyone has choices, the kitsune corrected gently. You could lie down and let the parade pass over you. Your body would remain, but your spirit would join us. Quick, relatively painless. Many choose that path. Not ready to die. Who is? The fox laughed, a sound like wind chimes. But death isn't truly the end. You see that now, yes? Look around you. We are proof that consciousness persists. Forms change, purposes shift, but the essential self continues. Forever, if you're clever about it. Takeshi forced himself to look directly at the fox. What are you? Ah, the essential question. The kitsune's tails swirled faster, I am what happens when a fox lives 200 years in the wild, learning and growing, accumulating power. I am transformation incarnate, proof that the natural world contains its own magic. What are you, merchant of silks? Still just human, or something more now that you've crossed the threshold? He had no answer. His sense of self, so solid hours ago, now felt fluid, undefined. Was he still Takeshi of Osaka, or had he become something new when he passed beneath that burning gate? The fox seemed satisfied by his silence. Good. Uncertainty means growth. Rigidity means death. True death, the kind where nothing continues. Remember that when dawn comes, if it comes. If it comes. The words chilled him more than the creature's presence. Was dawn guaranteed? Or could the parade stretch on forever, one eternal night where time held no meaning and the supernatural reigned supreme? The street widened ahead, opening into a plaza Takeshi recognized. Kiyomizudera's approach, where vendors sold amulets and tourists posed for photographs during daylight hours. But tonight, the plaza transformed into something else entirely. A festival ground. The parade's core celebration occurred here. Yokai danced in elaborate circles, their movements synchronized yet chaotic, following patterns that predated human mathematics. Musicians gathered in clusters, demon shamisen players plucking instruments strung with what looked like human hair, flute players whose instruments were made from hollowed bone, drummers beating on surfaces of stretched leather that might have once been skin. Food stalls lined the plaza's edges, but the offerings made Takeshi's stomach twist. Skewered things that writhed on their sticks, bowls of liquid that glowed and bubbled, fruits and colors that shouldn't exist, emitting smells both enticing and nauseating. Spirits and creatures bartered with currency he couldn't identify. Whispers and promises, memories and dreams. Things, intangible, made momentarily solid. The parade flowed into this gathering like a river reaching the sea. Marchers dispersed to join dancing circles, to visit stalls, to greet others of their kind with gestures that ranged from friendly to hostile to utterly alien. And Takeshi stood alone in the center of it all, suddenly exposed, no longer hidden within the procession's protective current. Every eye in the plaza turned toward him. The drums fell silent. Nurarahayan's palanquin descended from above. Had it been floating overhead the entire time, watching, settling in the plaza's center? The Supreme Commander regarded Takeshi with that same unsettling mixture of curiosity and amusement. "You've reached the heart," Nurarihan announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the plaza, despite speaking at conversational volume. The celebration's core. Here we pause, between midnight and dawn, to honor what we've lost and celebrate what we've retained. Here the boundaries blur completely. He gestured to the assembled masses. "They're curious about you, merchant. A living human, walking among us by choice. Well, semi-choice, is a rare entertainment. Some will try to trick you. Others will simply observe. All will remember. Your actions here will become legend. One more story added to the infinite tales of the parade." Takeshi's throat tightened. What should I do?" "Survive," Nurarihan said simply. "Don't accept challenges you can't win. Don't make promises you can't keep. Don't eat the food or drink the drink. And whatever you do, don't lose yourself to the music. Many humans have danced themselves to death at our festivals, their feet moving until the body wears away to nothing but spirit." The Supreme Commander leaned back in his palanquin, clearly enjoying himself. "Oh, and one more thing. Time flows differently here. What feels like minutes might be hours. What feels like hours might be minutes. Dawn will come when it comes, but your perception of when is negotiable. Try not to think about it too much. Madness that way lies. With that less than comforting advice, Nurarihan's palanquin rose again, floating toward the plaza's edge where it settled to observe. The drums resumed, and the festival continued. A group of tanuki approached Takeshi first, raccoon dogs the size of large dogs walking upright, their comically oversized testicles swinging with each step. They wore no clothing but somehow seemed more dignified than many humans Takeshi had known. One carried a sake jug. "Drink with us, human!" the tanuki shouted cheerfully. "We're celebrating!" "Celebrating what?" Takeshi asked, remembering Nurarihan's warning about not refusing direct questions. "Life, death, the space between, the joke that is existence." The tanuki laughed, a sound like barking. "Come on, one drink. It's good sake. Stolen from the Emperor's private stores in 1392. Been aging ever since." Takeshi shook his head. "I can't." "Thank you, but I can't." The tanuki looked disappointed, but not offended. "Pity. Your loss." They wandered off, already offering the sake to a passing kappa who accepted with enthusiasm. Next came a procession of possessed objects, the Tsukumogami who'd marched in the parade, but now gathered with apparent purpose. The tea kettle he'd seen before hobbled forward, accompanied by a paper umbrella with one eye and a 100-year-old sandal that somehow conveyed personality through posture alone. "Human," the tea kettle said, its voice a whistling hiss. "You who bought new things and discarded us. You who replace rather than repair. Do you know what you create with such wastefulness?" Takeshi hesitated. I don't understand." "Us," the umbrella said, its eye narrowing. "Every object used for 100 years gains a soul, gains awareness, gains the right to exist beyond function. But humans forget. They throw us away before we can awaken, or they abandon us just after we gain consciousness. Do you know how that feels? To finally become aware only to be discarded?" The sandal added its voice, surprisingly deep. "We're not angry. Not anymore. Anger is for the young. We're just weary. And on nights like this, we remind the world that nothing is truly disposable. Everything persists. Everything remembers." Takeshi found himself bowing, a gesture of respect that emerged instinctively. "I apologize. For myself. For my culture. We've forgotten the old ways. We've forgotten that things have spirits." The three Tsukumogami seemed surprised by this. They huddled together, conferring in creaks and rustles. Finally, the tea kettle spoke again. "An honest apology is rare. We accept it. Walk carefully, human. The night is long, but those who show respect are remembered." They departed, and Takeshi felt a small measure of relief. Perhaps survival wasn't impossible. Perhaps respect and awareness could serve as shield where magic failed. But the night had many more tests to offer. A child approached. No, not a child. Something wearing a child's shape with disturbing imperfection. Its movements were too fluid, its smile too wide, its eyes too knowing. It carried a ball made of what looked like teeth bound together with hair. "Play with me," it said, not asked. "Catch." Before Takeshi could respond, the creature tossed the ball. Instinct made him catch it, and the moment his fingers closed around the sphere, he understood his mistake. The teeth bit into his palms, not hard enough to draw blood, but enough to sting, and the hair wrapped around his wrists like living rope. The child thing giggled. "Now we play forever. You're mine." "No." Takeshi forced the word out through gritted teeth. He focused on the ball, on the binding, on the intention behind it. The creature had power, certainly, but it had also made the offering. He hadn't asked for this. "I didn't agree to play. This was forced." The compact is void. The child's smile faltered. For a moment, ancient rage flickered across its features, and Takeshi saw what lay beneath the human guise. Something older than the city, older than Japan itself. A spirit of abandoned children who died alone and become twisted by that loneliness. But the rules mattered. Even to creatures like this, the rules mattered. The teeth released their grip. The hair unwound. The ball fell to the ground and rolled away, and the child thing vanished into the crowd, leaving only a lingering sense of malice. Takeshi's hands trembled. How many more tests? How many more encounters that could end in ensnarement or worse? The kitsune appeared at his side again, her 9 tails swaying hypnotically. You're learning. Good. The parade has rules, but many here will try to circumvent them. Stay alert. Don't let exhaustion make you careless. How long until dawn? Takeshi asked. The fox's expression became unreadable. Time is complicated here. You've been in the plaza for what feels like an hour to you, yes? He nodded. In the human world, perhaps 5 minutes have passed, or perhaps 3 hours. The boundary blurs time as well as space. Dawn comes when the sun rises over Mount He, not according to clocks or perception. Despair threatened to overwhelm him. If time itself was unreliable, how could he gauge his survival? How could he know if he was close to escape or only beginning this ordeal? Focus on the immediate, the kitsune advised, as if reading his thoughts. One encounter at a time, one moment at a time. The future is uncertain for everyone, but the present is yours to navigate. A commotion erupted across the plaza. Takeshi turned to see 2 oni engaged in what looked like a wrestling match, their massive bodies colliding with force that sent shockwaves through the ground. Spectators gathered, cheering and placing bets with coins that glimmered like solidified moonlight. Entertainment, the kitsune explained. The parade isn't all trials and tests. We enjoy ourselves, too. Life, or whatever this is, would be unbearable otherwise. Takeshi watched the contest, fascinated despite himself. The oni moved with surprising grace for creatures so large, their wrestling less about brute strength and more about technique and strategy. One oni executed a throw that sent his opponent flying, landing with a crash that created a crater in the plaza's stone. The crowd roared approval. The defeated oni laughed, accepting his loss with good humor, and the 2 embraced like old friends. It struck Takeshi then. These creatures weren't inherently evil. They were simply other, different, operating according to rules and values that didn't align with human morality but weren't necessarily opposed to it either. They celebrated, they competed, they socialized. They experienced joy and loss and the full spectrum of existence. Humanity had pushed them aside, denied their existence, built a rational world that left no room for the supernatural. And so they gathered here, in this liminal night, to remind the world of what had been forgotten. The realization shifted something in Takeshi's perception. His fear remained. These beings were dangerous, and he walked among them on sufferance. But it was joined now by something else. Respect, understanding, even a strange form of kinship. They were all in their way, surviving, persisting despite odds, refusing to disappear into the comfortable darkness of non-existence. A massive bell tolled, the sound rolling across the plaza like thunder. Takeshi felt it in his bones, in his teeth, vibrating through his entire being. The assembled creatures fell silent, turning toward the plaza's far end where a temple materialized from the mist. An ancient structure, all dark wood and swooping roof lines, paper lanterns casting warm light from within. Nararahayan's voice echoed from everywhere and nowhere. The hour of the ox passes. Dawn approaches, though still distant. The parade will resume its march. Those who walk must walk. Those who stay must stay. Choose now, merchant of Osaka. Continue or remain here forever. One more spirit among spirits. Takeshi looked at the temple, at the warm light spilling from its entrance. How easy it would be to step inside, to sit, to rest, to let go of his mortality and embrace whatever came next. But dawn was coming. Narration had said so, and something in Takeshi, some stubborn spark of humanity, refused to surrender before seeing one more sunrise. He turned away from the temple, away from the plaza's center, and walked toward where the parade gathered, preparing to continue its procession. The kitsune fell in beside him. Brave, foolish, both. You might actually survive this human. Takeshi, he said. My name is Takeshi. The fox smiled, showing teeth. I know, but names have power, and I'm not ready to bind myself to you with that knowledge. Not yet. Perhaps after dawn, if we both see it, I'll tell you mine. Together, they rejoined the parade as it flowed out of the plaza, continuing its march through Kyoto's shadowed streets. And Takeshi walked, one foot before the other, toward a dawn he could only hope existed. The parade wound through districts Takeshi had never seen, despite months of residence in the capital. Streets too narrow for his mental map of the city, twisted in directions that defied geography. Buildings leaned at angles that should have caused collapse, but remained stable through supernatural will or ancient engineering. Paper lanterns hung in the air without visible support, their light casting shadows that moved independently of their sources. The drums maintained their relentless rhythm, heartbeat of the impossible made manifest. Takeshi's own pulse had synchronized completely now, no longer fighting the cadence, but flowing with it. His feet moved automatically, following the pattern, and his mind began to drift into a strange state between waking and dreaming. Memories surfaced unbidden. His childhood in Osaka, playing beside the river with other merchants' sons. His grandfather sitting on the veranda, pipe glowing in the twilight, voice low and musical as he spun tales of yokai and spirits. Takeshi remembered dismissing those stories as entertainment, never considering they might be warnings preserved through generations, truth disguised as fiction. His grandfather's face materialized in the mist beside him, not quite solid, but more than imagination. The old man walked in step with the parade, wearing the same faded yukata he'd favored in life, pipe smoke trailing behind him like silk ribbons. Foolish boy, the ghost said fondly. Did you think I told you stories to entertain? Every tale had a lesson. Every monster had meaning. Grandfather? Takeshi's voice cracked. Are you real? Real enough. Dead enough. Part of the parade now, like everything else that was loved and forgotten. The ghost smiled, wrinkles deepening. I tried to prepare you. Tried to ensure you knew the old ways, the proper respect. But you were young, and the modern world was so loud. How could my whispered stories compete with steel and steam and electric light? I'm sorry. The words felt inadequate, but Takeshi meant them with his whole being. I should have listened. You're listening now. His grandfather's spirit reached out, and though his hand passed through Takeshi's shoulder without touching, warmth radiated from the gesture. That's what matters. You're seeing the truth of the world, that nothing ends, everything continues, and the boundary between what you call living and what you call dead is far thinner than you imagined. Will I become like you? Takeshi asked. If I survive until dawn, will I be trapped between worlds? His grandfather considered this, taking a long draw from his phantom pipe. You'll be changed. How could you not be? But trapped? No. You're walking this path as a living man, bearing witness by necessity rather than death. When dawn comes, you'll return to the mortal realm, but you'll carry this night with you forever. You'll see what others miss, the spirits in old houses, the yokai at crossroads, the thin places where worlds overlap. Is that a curse or a gift? Depends on how you use the knowledge. The ghost began to fade, dissolving back into the mist like smoke on wind. Walk well, grandson. Walk with respect. And when you see sunrise, remember those of us who can't. Takeshi wanted to call him back, to ask 1,000 questions, to apologize for years of dismissal and disbelief. But his grandfather was gone, returned to whatever corner of the parade he now inhabited, and the procession flowed onward through streets that grew increasingly strange. The buildings here were older than ancient. Their architecture predated known styles, combining elements that shouldn't exist together. Curved roof lines from eras 1,000 years apart, stonework that matched no existing technique, doorways shaped for occupants not quite human. Windows reflected not the street, but other places, forests of towering bamboo, oceans of black water, mountains that touched skies of unfamiliar constellations. The marchers changed too. The parade's composition had shifted during the plaza celebration, absorbing new participants while releasing others to their own pursuits. New faces emerged from the mist, new forms that ranged from almost human to utterly abstract. A procession of Yama-uba, mountain witches with wild white hair and iron teeth, cackled as they passed, carrying bundles of herbs and bones. Their laughter wasn't cruel, but knowing, the sound of beings who'd witnessed centuries and found the whole experience darkly amusing. Behind them came an inugami, a dog spirit the size of a horse, its fur the color of storm clouds. Chains hung from its neck, each link inscribed with prayers meant to bind it, but which now served as jewelry, a trophy of escaped servitude. It padded alongside Takeshi for several steps, regarding him with eyes that held uncomfortable intelligence. "You smell of fear," the inugami observed, its voice a rumbling growl, but also determination. Interesting combination. Most humans stink of one or the other, rarely both. "I'm trying to survive," Takeshi replied, surprised by how normal this conversation felt. Hours into the parade, speaking with supernatural creatures had become almost routine. Survival is the oldest instinct. Even we spirits remember it from our living days, those of us who lived anyway. Some of us were born directly from belief, from fear, from human imagination made manifest. The inugami's tail swished thoughtfully. "Do you know what you're walking toward, merchant?" "Dawn, supposedly." Literally true, but incomplete. You're walking toward transformation. The man who emerges from this night won't be the same man who entered it. Your eyes will always see both worlds now. Your ears will always hear the whispers others miss. Is that what you want? Takeshi considered this. Did he want supernatural sight? The burden of perceiving what most humans were blessed to ignore? But the question felt irrelevant. Choice had been taken from him the moment he'd stepped outside on this inauspicious night. Now he could only move forward, accepting whatever consequences came. "Want doesn't matter anymore," he said finally. "I'll take what comes and learn to live with it." The inugami made a sound that might have been approval. "Wise. Acceptance is underrated. Most humans fight reality until it breaks them. You're bending instead. That flexibility might save you." The spirit dog loped ahead, rejoining a pack of similar creatures that had manifested from a side street, and Takeshi continued his march. The parade entered a district of shrines, not the grand temples tourists visited, but small forgotten altars tucked into alleys and beneath overhangs. Each held offerings decades old, moldy rice cakes, shriveled fruit, sake cups filled with dust. These were the abandoned places, the holy sites that had fallen from human memory. As the parade passed each shrine, the offerings renewed themselves. Fresh rice appeared in bowls, fruit ripened and glowed with health. Sake refilled cups to overflowing. The neglected altars bloomed with attention from the supernatural procession, honored by those who still remembered when humans had been faithful. Small kami emerged from their shrines, tiny spirits no larger than cats, each representing some minor aspect of existence, the god of a particular well, the spirit of a specific tree, the kami of a neighborhood corner where lovers used to meet. They bowed to the passing parade, and the parade bowed back, a mutual recognition between entities pushed to the margins by modernity's advance. Takeshi found himself bowing too, honoring these forgotten gods. It felt right, necessary even. How many times had he passed shrines in daylight, without pausing, without offering even a moment of respect? The parade was teaching him the weight of such negligence. The kitsune reappeared, materializing from shadow with her 9 tails flowing like water. "You're doing remarkably well. Most humans have lost their minds by now, gibbering and crying. But you walk with purpose, showing respect, learning. Are you perhaps more than you seem, Takeshi of Osaka?" "Just a merchant," he said wearily. "A merchant who ignored too many warnings. Perhaps, or perhaps you carry your grandfather's blood more truly than you realized. That old man knew the old ways. Perhaps some of that knowledge lives in you, dormant but not dead, awakening tonight when you need it most." They walked in silence for a time, the parade flowing around them like a river around stones. The drumbeat continued, eternal and unwavering. But Takeshi had stopped noticing it consciously. It had become the background rhythm of existence, as natural as breathing or heartbeat. His legs should have been exhausted. Hours of walking. How many hours? Time remained elastic and unreliable. Should have reduced him to stumbling weakness, but he felt sustained by something beyond physical endurance. The parade itself seemed to be lending him strength, carrying him forward on its momentum. Or perhaps this was the first stage of transformation. Perhaps his body was already becoming something more than purely human, adapting to survive conditions that should have been impossible. The thought should have terrified him. Instead, Takeshi felt only a strange calm. Acceptance, as the Inugami had said. Whatever he was becoming, he would face it with open eyes. A new sound joined the drums and flutes, singing. Not the chanting that had underscored the entire procession, but actual melodies, hauntingly beautiful, in keys and scales that human music didn't use. The voices came from a group of Joragumo, spider women who'd taken human form but couldn't quite hide their true nature. Extra limbs folded against their backs, barely visible. Their eyes reflected light like faceted jewels. Beautiful and terrible in equal measure. Their song told a story, Takeshi realized, though he couldn't understand the words. A story of transformation, of creatures who existed between forms, neither one thing nor another, but containing multitudes. A story that might have been about them or might have been about him. The Joragumo noticed his attention and smiled with lips too red, eyes too knowing. One beckoned, inviting him to join their group, to learn their songs, to embrace the transformation they embodied. Takeshi shook his head, polite but firm. "Thank you, but I must continue walking." They laughed, not offended but amused, and their singing grew louder, wrapping around the parade like silk threads, binding the procession together with music. The street began to climb, ascending a hill Takeshi didn't recognize from his mental map. The incline should have taxed his already weary legs, but he found himself moving easier, lighter, as if gravity held less sway here. The parade climbed effortlessly, flowing upward like smoke. At the hill's crest stood a massive camphor tree, easily 1,000 years old, its branches spreading to create a canopy that seemed to support the sky itself. Paper talismans hung from every branch, tens of thousands of them, each inscribed with prayers and wishes and desperate pleas. Some were ancient, the paper yellow and brittle. Others looked recent, their ink still dark. The parade circled the tree 3 times, a ritual procession within the procession. Each circuit, the yokai called out in their various voices, honoring the tree spirit that dwelt within. On the 3rd circuit, the tree responded. Its trunk split, revealing a face carved by centuries of growth. Or perhaps the face had always been there, simply waiting for the right moment to be seen. Eyes of glowing amber opened. A mouth formed from wood grain stretched in what might have been a smile. The parade walks, the tree spirit rumbled, its voice like wind through leaves. Another year passes, and still we persist. Still we remember. Still we refuse the comfort of forgetting. The assembled yokai roared agreement, and the sound shook the earth, rattled the sky, sent birds fleeing from nests in distant forests. Takeshi stood transfixed. He was witnessing something fundamental, something that explained the parade's true purpose. This wasn't just celebration or reminder or reclamation of space. This was defiance. This was refusal to disappear, despite a world that no longer believed, no longer remembered, no longer cared. Every forgotten god, every abandoned spirit, every supernatural being pushed to the margins. They all gathered here, one night a year, to declare their continued existence, to remind the universe, we are still here, we still matter. Forget us at your peril. The tree spirit's gaze found Takeshi, and he felt that attention, like physical weight pressing down on his shoulders. A living human walks with the dead and dispossessed. Why? Because I had no choice, Takeshi answered truthfully. I witnessed what should remain hidden. I walked to survive until dawn. And if you survive, what then? Will you forget, like so many before you? Will you return to your rational world and dismiss this night as fever dream or madness? The question hung in the air, and Takeshi understood this was the true test, not endurance or respect or cleverness, but commitment. What would he do with this knowledge once safely returned to daylight? I will remember, he said, and the words felt like oath, like promise, like vow. I will honor what I've seen. I will teach others if they'll listen. I won't let these stories die. The tree spirit considered him with those ancient eyes. Finally, it nodded. Spoken well. Hold to those words, Takeshi of Osaka, and the parade will remember you favorably. Break them and... The unspoken threat hung heavier than any explicit warning. The tree's face closed, bark sealing over the features until only the faintest outline remained. The parade resumed its march, descending the hill's far side, and Takeshi walked with them, carrying the weight of his promise. Time collapsed and expanded like a bellows, each moment stretching into eternity before compressing to nothing. Takeshi lost all sense of duration. He might have been walking for hours or days or mere minutes. The parade continued, endless and eternal, and he continued with it, one foot before the other, accepting the impossibility of measuring what couldn't be measured. The city changed around him with each street. One moment, ancient Kyoto of the Heian period surrounded him. Wooden buildings with elaborate carvings, silk banners hanging from noble houses, the architecture of an age when supernatural and natural worlds overlapped openly. The next moment, the city transformed into something older still, a settlement that predated Japanese civilization, buildings of a style he didn't recognize inhabited by people whose faces suggested bloodlines mixed with something not quite human. Then forward, into Kyoto's future, streets of steel and glass, electric lights blazing, machines humming with power that would have seemed like magic to his ancestors. But even in this future vision, the parade marched, undimmed by technology, undiminished by human progress. They existed across all time simultaneously, eternal witnesses to civilization's rise and fall and rise again. "We persist," the kitsune said, appearing at his side. "That's our nature. Humans build and destroy and build again. But we remain. We adapt. We remember when you forget. We carry the continuity that your short lives can't maintain." Takeshi watched the city shift through centuries, each transformation revealing new layers of truth. How do you bear it? Watching everything change, everyone you knew die, the world moving forward without you? The fox's expression grew distant. "Some of us don't bear it well. Some go mad, becoming the demons that your stories warn about, twisted by jealousy and loss until they're nothing but rage. Others find purpose in the watching. We become the memory keepers, the ones who can say, 'This happened here,' or that custom came from this tragedy, where she lived and mattered, even though history forgot her name. Which are you? I'm still deciding." The kitsune's tail swirled in patterns that might have been language. "I'm only 300 years old, young by yokai standards. I have time to determine what kind of being I want to become." 300 years. Young. The scope of that existence dwarfed Takeshi's comprehension. His entire bloodline, every ancestor he could name, fit into a fraction of the kitsune's life. How did one maintain sanity across such expanse? How did identity persist when every context, every frame of reference, disappeared and was replaced? The parade turned down a street that shouldn't exist. A road made of water that supported their footsteps without explanation. Fish swam beneath the surface, but they weren't normal fish. They had human faces, human hands, eyes that blinked with disturbing awareness. These were the spirits of drowning victims, Takeshi realized. Those who died in rivers and lakes and now existed in this liminal form, neither fully dead nor alive, bound to water forever. One of the fish people rose partially from the water, its human face streaming with liquid. "Join us," it gurgled. "The water is cool and forgiving. No more walking, no more struggle. Just float forever in comfortable darkness." The invitation carried genuine appeal. Takeshi's legs ached despite supernatural sustenance. His mind felt worn thin by constant vigilance, constant wonder, constant awareness of his mortality among the immortal. How easy it would be to simply step off the road into the water, to let go of the burden of living. "No," he said firmly, shaking his head to clear it. "I walk to dawn. I've promised." The fish person shrugged, a strange gesture on a body half human, half fish, and sank back into the water. Others rose to take its place, offering similar invitations. But Takeshi kept his eyes forward, focused on the parade's distant front, refusing to be swayed. The water road ended at the shore of a lake that hadn't existed moments before. Mist hung thick over its surface, and in that mist, shapes moved. Large shapes, suggesting creatures of immense size dwelling in the depths. The parade didn't pause. They walked across the lake's surface, their footsteps creating ripples but never breaking through. Takeshi followed, heart hammering, trusting that the same magic that sustained the yokai would support him. The water held. Barely. He felt its resistance, felt how thin the barrier was between walking and drowning. But he kept moving, kept pace with the procession, and the lake allowed his passage. Halfway across, something rose from the depths. A dragon, or what Westerners called dragons, though the Japanese knew them as ryu, water serpents of divine origin. This one was ancient beyond calculation, scales the color of deep ocean, eyes like moons, whiskers trailing behind it for hundreds of feet. It regarded the parade with an expression Takeshi couldn't read. Then it spoke, voice resonating through water and air simultaneously. The parade walks. Another year, another night. Do you tire of this endless procession? Does anyone? Nurari Hyan's palanquin floated forward to address the dragon. We tire, old friend. We tire of being forgotten, of being relegated to stories and illustrations, but we refuse the alternative. Better to march one night each year than fade to complete non-existence. The dragon nodded slowly. I understand. I sleep in the deep places, dreaming of ages when humans left offerings and called my name with reverence. Now they dam my rivers and pollute my waters and call me myth. But I persist. We all persist. That's all we can do, Nurari Hyan agreed. Persist and remember and hope that someday humans will remember us too. The dragon sank back into the lake, creating waves that should have capsized the parade, but merely rocked them gently, a blessing from deep waters. Takeshi felt the weight of that exchange, the melancholy that underlay the parade's celebration. These beings weren't malicious, weren't evil in any meaningful sense. They were simply unwanted, unremembered, clinging to existence through stubbornness and will. The lakeshore appeared ahead, and the parade stepped back onto solid ground. Though solid remained a relative term. The earth here was spongy, yielding, as if the boundary between land and water wasn't quite resolved. They entered a forest of bamboo that grew too fast to be natural. Takeshi could see the stalks extending upward as he watched, reaching toward a sky that seemed too close, the stars too large and somehow predatory in their observation. The bamboo created natural corridors, and the parade flowed through them in a long line, single file, each marcher silent now, as if even the yokai recognized this as holy ground. The silence pressed down like physical weight. No drums, no flutes, no chanting or singing. Only the soft whisper of footsteps and the creak of bamboo swaying in wind that came from no direction. Takeshi's breath sounded explosive in his ears. Each step felt significant, weighted with meaning he couldn't articulate. The bamboo forest wasn't empty. He could sense presences watching from between the stalks, ancient spirits who'd made this place their home long before human settlement. They judged the parade as it passed, measuring each participant against standards unknown and unknowable. A bamboo stalk directly ahead split open, revealing a hollow interior large enough to walk through. The parade entered without hesitation, flowing into darkness. Takeshi's step faltered. Enter that darkness? Trust that something existed beyond it? Every instinct screamed warnings, but the alternative was stopping, remaining behind, and he'd seen enough, abandoned things in the parade to know that fate was worse than forward movement into uncertainty. He stepped into the bamboo's hollow interior. Darkness engulfed him, absolute and smothering. He couldn't see his hand before his face, couldn't see the parade members ahead or behind. couldn't see anything except darkness so complete it took on texture, pressing against his skin like velvet. But he could hear. The parade's footsteps continued, confident and unwavering, and he followed the sound. Trusted it. Put one foot before the other in complete blindness, surrendering to faith that the path continued, that this wasn't merely clever trap disguised as passage. Voices whispered in the darkness, each speaking directly into his mind. Who are you? Why do you walk? What makes you worthy? Will you remember? Can you carry the weight of knowing? Takeshi answered in his mind, unsure if the voices heard, but needing to respond. I am Takeshi, merchant of Osaka. I walk to survive. I don't know if I'm worthy, but I'll try to be. Yes, I'll remember. Yes, I'll carry this weight, however heavy it becomes. The darkness seemed to consider his answers. Then, like a door opening, light appeared ahead. Not bright, but present. A gradual return of visibility that felt like blessing. The parade emerged from the bamboo into a clearing that defied natural law. The space was too large to fit within the forest, stretching for what looked like miles in every direction. And in that clearing's center stood a stone circle, megaliths arranged in patterns that predated human civilization in Japan, suggesting travelers from distant lands or simply truths that arose independently across the world. Stone circles mark places of power. The parade gathered around the stones, forming rings within rings, concentric circles of supernatural beings surrounding the ancient structure. Nurarihyan's palanquin descended into the circle's exact center. We have reached the heart of the night, the Supreme Commander announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the clearing, despite speaking softly. The hour when darkness is deepest, when dawn seems impossible, when hope itself becomes an act of faith. The assembled yokai murmured agreement. We gather here every year to remember why we persist, Nurarihyan continued, to remind ourselves of our purpose. We are the forgotten, the abandoned, the denied. But we are also the proof that nothing truly ends, that consciousness persists beyond death, beyond belief, beyond human recognition. He gestured to the stones. These were raised by hands long dead, by people whose names are lost, whose language is forgotten, whose very civilization has crumbled to dust. But the stones remain, and we remain. As long as anything remembers, we exist. As long as stories are told, we persist. As long as one human in 100 generations witnesses our parade and carries that knowledge forward, we have purpose. The Supreme Commander's gaze found Takeshi among the crowd. You are that human tonight, merchant. You carry our continued existence in your memory. Will you be faithful to that burden? Takeshi felt thousands of eyes upon him, eyes of every description, human and inhuman, corporeal and ethereal. The weight of their attention was crushing, but he stood straight and answered clearly. I will remember. I will honor what I've seen. I will carry your stories forward. Spoken well, Nurarihyan said, and should you break this vow? Then may the parade claim me next year, Takeshi replied, understanding the necessary cost. May I walk not as living witness, but as another forgotten thing, one more spirit bound to the procession. The murmur that ran through the assembled yokai carried approval. He'd understood the compact, accepted the weight of witness with eyes open. Then let us celebrate. Nurarihyan's voice rose to fill the clearing. Let us dance the old dances, sing the old songs, honor the old ways. Dawn approaches. Yes, it truly approaches this time, and when it comes, we'll disperse to our hiding places for another year. But until then, let us revel in our existence. The drums thundered back to life, louder than ever. The flutes shrieked and wailed, the voices rose in songs of celebration and defiance, and the parade began to dance. Takeshi found himself caught in the movement, swept up by the rhythm. He'd never danced in his life, not properly, not with the abandon these creatures displayed. But his body moved anyway, responding to the music's pull, following patterns that seemed to emerge from his bones rather than his mind. The kitsune danced beside him, her 9 tails flowing like silk banners. The inugami loped in circles, powerful and graceful. The tsukumogami hopped and swayed. The oni stomped with earth-shaking force. The yurei floated through the dancers, their movements graceful despite their incorporeal nature. Around and around the stone circle they danced, and Takeshi danced with them, forgetting his fear, forgetting his exhaustion, forgetting everything except this moment of shared existence. He was alive. They were. Something beyond life, but not diminished by that difference. Together, they celebrated the fundamental fact of consciousness, of awareness, of the mysterious force that animated flesh and spirit alike. The sky above began, imperceptibly at first, to lighten. The drums slowed gradually, subtly, their rhythm decreasing from frantic celebration to something more measured, more deliberate. The change was so gradual that Takeshi couldn't identify the exact moment it began, but he felt it in his bones. The parade was winding down. The yokai sensed it too. Their dancing became less wild, more controlled, movements transitioning from ecstatic celebration to something closer to ritual farewell. They were beginning their dispersal, preparing to return to whatever hidden corners of the world they inhabited during daylight hours. The sky's lightning accelerated. Black became deep blue. Deep blue became lighter blue. Stars faded one by one, surrendering their claim on the night. In the east, where Mount He's peak would be visible if the forest hadn't obscured the view, a faint glow began to build. Dawn. Actual real dawn. Not metaphorical, not symbolic, but the genuine astronomical event. The sun was rising. Nararahayan's voice carried across the clearing one final time. The night ends. The parade concludes. Return to your homes, your rivers, your mountains, your forgotten shrines. Rest well. Remember well. We'll gather again when the year turns. The Supreme Commander's attention focused on Takeshi. You have survived, merchant. Walked the entire parade. Witnessed what few humans see and fewer still remember. You are marked now, changed forever. Do you accept this transformation? Takeshi nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in his throat. Then go, return to your mortal world. But remember your promise. Remember us. And when fear or doubt whispers that this was merely dream or madness, look for the signs we've left on you. Nararihan raised one elongated finger, and Takeshi felt something shift in his chest, in his eyes, in his very essence. Not painful but profound, as if his being had been subtly rewritten, encoded with new information that would take years to fully understand. The Supreme Commander's palanquin rose, lifting into the lightening sky. Around the clearing, yokai began to fade. Some walked into shadows that accepted them like doorways. Others dissolved into mist. Still others transformed into their original forms, animals or objects or abstract concepts, and departed in those shapes. The kitsune approached Takeshi one final time. You did well, human. Better than I expected. Perhaps we'll meet again in some future night when you need guidance or I need entertainment. What's your name? Takeshi asked, remembering her earlier refusal. Will you tell me now? The fox smiled, showing all her teeth. Perhaps in another meeting. Names have power, and I'm still not ready to bind myself to you that thoroughly. But I'll remember you, Takeshi of Osaka. That's its own form of binding." She vanished, tails disappearing last, like smoke drawn away by wind. The clearing emptied rapidly. Within minutes, only a handful of yokai remained, and those were fading fast. The Tsukumogami who'd spoken to him, the tea kettle, umbrella, and sandal, gave small bows before departing. The Inugami raised its head in farewell. Even his grandfather's ghost appeared briefly, one more time, to smile with pride before dissolving into dawn's approach. Takeshi stood alone in the stone circle as the last supernatural presences departed. The megaliths seemed less impressive in the growing light, weathered and ancient, but no longer obviously magical. The clearing shrank, returning to normal proportions, and through the trees he could see regular forest, regular sky, regular sunrise painting the horizon gold and pink and orange. He was back in the natural world. The parade had released him. His legs, which had carried him through impossible distances sustained by supernatural energy, suddenly remembered they were merely human. Exhaustion crashed over him like a wave, and he collapsed to his knees on the dew-wet grass. How far had he walked? How many streets? How many districts? How many impossibilities? His feet should be bloody ruins, but when he examined them, they showed only normal wear. Tired, yes, but not damaged beyond recovery. The talisman the old woman had given him was gone, consumed to protect him. His clothes were disheveled, but intact. His mind felt stretched, expanded, filled with memories that shouldn't fit in a single skull, but somehow did. He'd survived the Hyakki Yagyo. Takeshi rose slowly, using a megalith for support, and looked around. The stone circle stood in a clearing that appeared on no map, in a forest that might or might not have been the same bamboo grove he'd entered hours ago. But in the distance, through the trees, he could see the familiar outline of temple roofs, the shape of buildings he recognized. Kyoto. Real Kyoto. The daylight city of humans and rational laws. He walked toward it, each step easier than the last as his body readjusted to normal physics, normal time, normal existence. The forest thinned, becoming recognizable paths, and he emerged onto a street he knew, the same street he'd been on when the parade began, though it looked different now, smaller, and less significant in morning light. The city was waking up. Shopkeepers opened their doors, preparing for the day's business. Early risers walked past with buckets and baskets, heading to market or well or temple. Normal life resuming, oblivious to the supernatural procession that had marched through these very streets hours before. A woman arranging vegetables at her shop entrance looked up as Takeshi passed. Her eyes widened, and she made a small gesture, hand crossing her chest in a warding sign, before quickly looking away. She'd seen something. Whatever mark Nararion had placed on him was visible, at least to those who knew how to look. Takeshi continued walking, heading toward his warehouse to collect the papers that had started this entire ordeal. The documents seemed absurdly unimportant now, trivial commerce compared to what he'd experienced. But he retrieved them anyway, going through the motions of normalcy, even though nothing would be normal ever again. His hands shook as he locked the warehouse door. Exhaustion and delayed shock were setting in, his body finally processing the trauma of the night. He needed rest, needed food, needed to sit somewhere safe and try to integrate what had happened into some framework his rational mind could accept. But first, he needed to visit someone. The old woman's house sat in a district Takeshi had noted but never explored. A collection of ancient buildings that leaned against each other for support, their wood dark with age. their paper screens yellowed and patched. Smoke rose from cooking fires, and the smell of miso soup drifted through narrow alleys. He found her by the description she'd given when pressing the talisman into his hands. Third house past the crooked pine, with the blue door curtain. The house was tiny, barely more than 2 rooms, but its threshold radiated the same protective energy he'd felt from the wards on wealthy merchants' gates. Takeshi knelt outside the door and called softly, "Honored grandmother, it's Takeshi, the merchant. May I enter?" Silence. Then the rustle of movement, and the door slid open to reveal the old woman. She looked at him with eyes that held no surprise, only assessment. Those ancient eyes traveled across his face, his posture, his altered presence, and she nodded slowly. "You survived." Not a question, but confirmation. "Come in. You'll want tea, I think, and something to eat. The parade takes its toll, even on successful witnesses." Inside, the house was Spartan, but clean. A low table sat in the center, cushions arranged around it. Scrolls hung on the walls, protective spells, if Takeshi's new sight interpreted correctly, written by someone with genuine spiritual power. This was no simple peasant woman, but a practitioner of the old ways, someone who maintained knowledge most had forgotten. She poured tea with practiced grace, the ritual of it calming. Takeshi accepted the cup with both hands and drank, the warmth spreading through him like medicine. "Tell me," she said simply. "What did you see?" And Takeshi told her. Everything. The drums and the first creatures, Nurarahan's judgment, the festival in the plaza, the transformation of the city, the stone circle ceremony. Words poured out of him, details he hadn't realized he'd absorbed, observations made with senses he didn't know he possessed. The old woman listened without interruption, occasionally nodding or making small sounds of acknowledgement. When he finished, she refilled his tea and spoke. "You were chosen. Understand that clearly. The parade could have consumed you at any moment. Nurarihayan could have added you to his procession permanently, but they didn't. They tested you, yes, but they also invested in you, given you a gift wrapped in trial." "A gift?" Takeshi's laugh was bitter. "I'm marked now, changed. That woman at the shop saw something in me that made her afraid. She saw what you've become, a bridge, a living person who exists partially in both worlds, able to perceive and interact with supernatural reality while remaining grounded in human existence. Such people are rare and valuable." The old woman set down her tea. "You made a promise to the parade, yes? To remember and honor them?" "Yes." "Then you have purpose now, responsibility. You must carry their stories, teach others, ensure the old ways don't fade completely. It's a burden, certainly, but it's also meaning. How many people live entire lives without discovering their purpose? You found yours in a single night." She reached into her kimono and withdrew a small book, its pages bound with silk thread, its cover worn smooth by handling. "This was my teacher's journal. It contains accounts of previous parades, going back 300 years. Stories from other witnesses who survived and recorded what they saw. Take it. Add your own account. Pass it to someone else when you're old, when you find the right person to carry it forward." Takeshi accepted the journal with reverence. Opening it revealed pages covered in different hands, different eras of writing, but all describing the same essential truth. The Hyakki Yagyo was real, had always been real, and would continue as long as consciousness persisted. "Why me?" he asked. "Why was I chosen?" The old woman smiled, wrinkles deepening. "Why is anyone chosen? Maybe your grandfather's stories planted seeds that needed this night to bloom. Maybe you were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, and the parade decided to make use of the accident. Maybe the yokai saw something in you that even you don't recognize yet. The why matters less than what you do with it. She stood, indicating the conversation was ending. Rest today. Eat. Let your body and mind recover. Tomorrow, begin the work. Write your account while memory is fresh. Study the other journals. Learn the names of yokai, their natures, their customs. Become an expert not through books alone, but through lived experience enhanced by historical knowledge. At the door, she placed one gnarled hand on Takeshi's shoulder. You'll see them now, even during daylight. Small ones mostly, kappa in ponds, tanuki at crossroads, spirits in old houses. Don't be afraid. Acknowledge them with respect, but don't let them disrupt your life. You're still primarily human. Remember that. Don't lose yourself to the supernatural world just because you can now perceive it. Takeshi bowed deeply. Thank you, grandmother, for the talisman, for the warning, for this guidance. Thank your grandfather. He asked me to watch for you years ago before he died. Said his grandson would come to Kyoto eventually. Said you carried sensitivity that needed proper guidance. I merely fulfilled a promise to an old friend. She closed the door gently, leaving Takeshi standing in the alley with a journal of impossibilities in his hands and the morning sun warm on his face. He walked back to his lodgings in a daze. Other pedestrians gave him small amounts of space, unconsciously avoiding him without knowing why. The mark Nurarihion had placed made him slightly other, slightly apart from pure humanity. Not rejected, but recognizably different to those with any spiritual sensitivity. At his room, he finally allowed himself to collapse onto the futon. His body demanded rest, and he surrendered to it, falling into sleep so deep it bordered on unconsciousness. Dreams came, vivid and strange. He dreamed of the parade continuing in some other dimension, marching through invisible streets while the city went about its business above. He dreamed of his grandfather walking with yokai as equals, finally fully belonging to their world. He dreamed of future parades he might witness, of nights yet to come when the boundary would thin again. When he woke, the sun was setting. He'd slept the entire day, and his body felt simultaneously rested and strange, as if it had been subtly rebuilt during unconsciousness. The journal lay beside him. Takeshi opened it to the first blank page and began to write. On the night of the monkey, in the autumn of this year, I witnessed the Hyakki Yagyo. The account poured out of him. Every detail, every encounter, every emotion. He wrote until his hand cramped, then continued writing. He wrote through the night, documenting everything while memory remained sharp and undistorted by time. By morning, he had filled 30 pages with his experience. It wasn't poetry or literature, but raw testimony, immediate and honest. Future witnesses would read this and know what to expect, how to survive, what lessons the parade offered. He set down his brush as dawn broke, his second dawn since entering the parade, though it felt like he'd been walking for years. Outside his window, Kyoto woke to another normal day. Vendors called their wares. Children ran laughing through streets. Merchants like himself prepared for business. But Takeshi could see the other layer now. A kappa peeked from a well, watching humans with curious eyes. A tanuki in human guise bought vegetables, its tail barely concealed under its robes. Small spirits clustered around a shrine, feeding on the prayers and offerings left by faithful visitors. The supernatural world persisted alongside the mundane, always present, simply unnoticed by most. But Takeshi saw it now, would always see it. His eyes had been opened, and they could never close again. Days passed, then weeks, and Takeshi remained in Kyoto. His original plans, conclude business and return to Osaka, felt impossible now. How could he go back to a life of simple commerce when he'd witnessed the fundamental truth behind reality's surface? How could he trade silk and rice when his mind constantly wandered to the parade, to the promises he'd made, to the responsibility he now carried? He began visiting sites he'd seen during the parade, trying to reconcile supernatural and daylight geography. Some locations matched perfectly. The plaza where the festival had occurred was a real space, though empty and mundane under sun. Others couldn't be found, as if they existed only during that liminal night. The stone circle, the water road, the bamboo forest that grew too fast. None appeared on any map. None could be reached by following remembered paths. Perhaps they existed between places, he theorized, pockets of supernatural reality that intersected with the human world only when conditions were right. Or perhaps they'd never been physically present, experienced instead in some spiritual dimension his temporarily enhanced perception had accessed. The ambiguity didn't trouble him. If anything, it felt appropriate. The supernatural shouldn't be easily mapped or fully understood. Mystery was part of its nature. He sought out other sensitives, people who showed subtle signs of spiritual awareness. The old woman introduced him to a network of practitioners, scholars, monks, and shrine keepers who maintained knowledge of the old ways. They welcomed him cautiously, testing his knowledge, gauging his commitment, ensuring he wasn't merely curious, but genuinely dedicated to preserving what he'd learned. In their company, Takeshi found community. These were people who understood the weight of seeing both worlds, who knew the isolation of perceiving what others missed. With them, he could speak freely about yokai encounters, about maintaining respect for the supernatural, about the responsibility of witness. One conversation with an elderly monk particularly affected him. They sat in a temple garden, watching koi swim lazy circles, while a small water spirit played among the lily pads, visible to them but invisible to the tourists wandering past. "You're struggling," the monk observed. "I can see it in how you hold yourself. The weight of knowledge is crushing you." Takeshi nodded. "I made a promise. To remember, to honor, to teach. But how? Who will listen? If I tell normal people about the parade, they'll think me mad. And even among believers, my experience is extraordinary. How can I fulfill my vow when the world resists the truth?" The monk smiled gently. "You're thinking too large. Start small. Write stories. Not testimony, but tales that carry the truth wrapped in entertainment. Your grandfather did this, yes? Told you stories as a child? Yes. Then do the same. Find children, or find adults who've retained childlike openness, and tell them about yokai, about the parade. Make it exciting. Make it frightening. Make it memorable. Plant seeds. Most will forget or dismiss, but some will remember. Those few will carry the knowledge forward, and perhaps one of them will witness a future parade and need the foundation you've provided." That seems indirect, uncertain. "All teaching is uncertain," the monk replied. "You cast seeds widely and trust that some will take root. You can't control outcomes, only your faithfulness to the process. The yokai understand this. They persist without guarantee of recognition, trusting that their continued existence has value even when forgotten. You must do the same." The monk's words settled something in Takeshi's heart. He didn't need to be a great scholar or powerful practitioner. He simply needed to be faithful to his promise in whatever small ways presented themselves. He began telling stories, first to the old woman's grandchildren, then to other children in the neighborhood, then to anyone who would listen. He didn't claim the stories were true, didn't insist on belief. He simply told them tales of yokai and spirits, of the parade that marched through Kyoto on certain nights, of the importance of respecting what couldn't be fully understood. Some listeners were enthralled, others were skeptical. A few showed the telltale signs of spiritual sensitivity, their eyes widening with recognition rather than mere entertainment. To these few, Takeshi gave extra attention, answering their questions seriously, lending them books from his growing collection, introducing them to the network of practitioners. Months passed. Autumn returned, bringing with it the anniversary of Takeshi's parade encounter. He felt it approaching like physical pressure, a weight in his chest that grew heavier as the calendar advanced toward that significant night. The night of the monkey arrived clear and cold, stars brilliant in a cloudless sky. Takeshi prepared carefully, studying the lunar calendar, confirming this was indeed one of the inauspicious nights. He dressed in simple clothes, carried no talismans or protections, and as sunset approached, he walked to the shrine where he'd first hidden from the parade's approach. He wasn't sure what he expected. Would the parade march again? Would it skip this year? Would he be invisible to it now, marked already and thus exempt from further involvement? Midnight approached. The city grew quiet, though not with the supernatural silence that had preceded the parade before. This was normal nighttime quiet, the peaceful rest of a city sleeping. Then, faint in the distance, drums. Takeshi's heart leaped. It was happening again. The parade was marching, and he could hear it even though he stood in the human world rather than accidentally encountering the procession. The sound grew louder, and with it came the mist, the cold, the sense of boundaries thinning. But this time, Takeshi didn't hide. He stood at the shrine's entrance, visible and waiting, honoring the parade rather than fearing it. The first marchers appeared, and they saw him. A Karakasa blinked its single eye in recognition. A Kappa waved one webbed hand. The procession acknowledged his presence without threatening or testing him. Then came Nurarihyan's palanquin, and the Supreme Commander smiled that ancient, knowing smile. "The witness returns," Nurarihyan said, standing rather than hiding, greeting rather than fleeing. "You've learned well, merchant." "I've tried," Takeshi replied, bowing deeply. "I've kept my promise, written the accounts, shared the stories, honored the old ways. I know. We watch, remember? Your faithfulness has been noted." The Supreme Commander gestured to the passing parade. "You may walk with us again if you wish. Not as tested mortal, but as honored guest. The parade welcomes friends." The invitation hung in the air, tempting. To walk among them again, to witness new wonders, to fully embrace his dual nature. But Takeshi shook his head gently. "Thank you, truly, but I think my place is here, at the boundary, walking between worlds rather than fully in either. Is that acceptable?" Nurarihyan's smile widened. "More than acceptable. Wise. Too many who gain our sight lose themselves in it, abandoning human connections to chase supernatural understanding. But you recognize the value of balance, of being bridge rather than convert." The palanquin began to rise. "Continue your work, Takeshi of Osaka. Teach the children. Record the stories. Maintain the knowledge. We'll remember your name, and when your time comes to join the parade permanently, as all mortal times eventually come, you'll be welcomed not as captured spirit, but as honored elder." The procession moved on, marching through streets that existed in both worlds simultaneously. Takeshi watched until the last yokai passed from sight, until the drums faded to memory, until the mist cleared and normal night returned. He walked back to his lodging slowly, at peace. He'd found his path. Not the one he'd planned when he'd first arrived in Kyoto with ledgers and ambitions of expanding his silk trade. Not the rational, profitable life he'd imagined building. But something more meaningful, more necessary, the role of keeper, of bridge, of witness who ensured the forgotten remained remembered, even if only by a few. The journal the old woman had given him now sat on his desk, joined by others he'd begun writing himself. Accounts of small encounters with yokai, observations about spiritual sites, notes on protective practices and respectful protocols. These books would outlive him, passed to the next generation of sensitives, adding to the accumulated knowledge that stretched back centuries. His silk business continued, but it had become secondary, a means of support rather than life's purpose. He'd discovered that the true currency wasn't gold or goods, but stories, memories, the preservation of truth in a world increasingly eager to forget. Some nights, when the moon was right and the hour was quiet, Takeshi would walk Kyoto's streets and see them. Small yokai going about their business, spirits tending forgotten shrines, kappa playing in temple ponds. They acknowledged him with nods or waves, or simply knowing glances. He was part of their world now, accepted as friend rather than feared as intruder. The mark narration had placed on him remained, visible to those with eyes to see. It marked him as protected, as allied, as someone who walked with the parade's blessing. Other practitioners recognized it and treated him with respect. Malicious spirits avoided him, understanding he was under the Supreme Commander's favor. But the mark also reminded him of responsibility. Every day, he carried the weight of his promise. Every story he told, every child he taught, every skeptic he gently challenged, all of it was fulfillment of the vow he'd made in that stone circle as the parade celebrated around him. Years would pass, he knew. Decades. He would grow old watching over this knowledge, perhaps finding an apprentice to pass it to, perhaps not. The outcome wasn't guaranteed, but his faithfulness was. That much he could control. And someday, when his mortal time ended, he would rejoin the parade, not as captured soul or punished witness, but as honored participant. One more spirit marching through the night to celebrate persistence, to honor the forgotten, to remind the world that nothing truly ends. The thought brought comfort rather than fear. He reached his lodgings and paused at the threshold, looking back at Kyoto's sleeping streets. Somewhere in the darkness, the parade continued its march through layers of reality most would never perceive. Drums echoed in dimensions adjacent to this one. Yokai danced in celebration of their continued existence, and the night, ancient and eternal, held space for all the things that refused to fade. Takeshi bowed once to the darkness, honoring what dwelt there. Then he entered his room, lit a single candle, and opened his journal to record this night's events. The parade had returned, had acknowledged him, had confirmed his path. He wrote until dawn, and when the first light touched Mount Hiei's peak, he set down his brush and allowed himself to rest. The sun rose over Kyoto, painting temple roofs gold and pink. The city woke to another day, its citizens unaware of the supernatural procession that had passed through their streets, unaware of the man who'd witnessed it and sworn to remember. But awareness wasn't required for truth to persist. The parade would march again next year, and the year after, and for all the years to come. As long as consciousness existed, as long as stories were told, as long as one person in each generation opened their eyes to see beyond the surface, The Hyakki Yagyo would continue, and Takeshi would be ready, watching, remembering, honoring, always honoring the night parade of 100 demons. In the years that followed, Takeshi became known throughout Kyoto as a storyteller of uncommon skill. Children gathered when he spoke, their eyes wide with wonder. Adults dismissed his tales as entertaining fiction, never quite believing, but never quite able to forget them either. He trained 3 apprentices over his lifetime, sensitive souls who showed the gift of sight, who could perceive the yokai in temple gardens and spirits at crossroads. To them, he passed the journals, the knowledge, the responsibility of witness. When Takeshi's time finally came, he died peacefully in his sleep during another night of the monkey, decades after his first encounter with the parade. Those with spiritual sight reported seeing him rise from his body with a smile, walking out into the street where the procession was already gathering. The parade welcomed him home. Now, if you walk Kyoto's old districts on certain nights when the boundary grows thin, you might see an elderly man among the marchers, a merchant of silks who kept his promise, who honored the forgotten, who chose to remember when forgetting would have been easier. The drums still echo through streets that exist in multiple dimensions. The parade still marches, celebrating persistence, honoring the abandoned, reminding the world that consciousness persists beyond death and denial. And somewhere in the procession, a storyteller walks with yokai as equals, sharing tales with creatures who have all of eternity to listen. The Hyakki Yagyo continues its eternal march, and those who witness it with respect are remembered forever.